Welcome from wherever you're coming, and good morning. And thank you for being here this morning. We're going to have a webinar called Accelerate Content Readiness and Grow Your Revenues. We're going to be talking about a lot of things having to do with building some complex media supply chains in the cloud, how it differentiates a bit from on-prem, some of the experiences we've had here at Cinnafilm and at SDVI. So I'm really happy to welcome our guests on the panel today, Geoff Stedman and Simon Eldridge, both from SDVI, and myself and Dom Jackson from Cinnafilm. And we'll get started with some quick intros, guys. I'll start with you, Geoff, and then we'll go around and start up right after that.
Great. Thanks, Lance, and hello, everyone. My name's Geoff Stedman. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for SDVI. Been with the company about 4 years. And prior to that, spent about 20 years or so in the media tech space. So looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Geoff.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Simon Eldridge. I'm the Chief Product Officer at SDVI. I've been doing this for 10 years, but like Geoff, I've been in the media space for about 20.
And I'm Dom Jackson. I'm the VP of Product for Cinnafilm. I've been at Cinnafilm for about 3 years, and then in the media tech space for about 15 years before that.
Nice. Thanks, Dom. Thanks, guys. And I'm Lance Maurer. I'm the CEO and founder of Cinnafilm. I started the company back in about 2004, so I've been doing this for about 20 years myself, and really glad to be here with some great friends in the industry. And I'll hand the conch off to you, Geoff, to start guiding the conversation.
Yeah, okay, great. And thanks, Lance. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. We are going to talk about, as Lance mentioned, content readiness and monetization strategies. But I think maybe before we get into those specifics, it might be interesting to just kind of hear a little bit about what we're seeing from our customers in terms of the overall market. You know, I think over the last 18 to 24 months, we've seen media companies really refocus on profitability, and inevitably that's led to, you know, staff transitions and restructurings. And I guess, you know, I'm curious, do we think the market is sort of settling down and figuring things out, or are there still transitions that customers are looking at? Lance, I mean, what are you hearing from your customers in terms of kind of the state of the market?
Well, I think the state of the market is everyone is feeling a sense of urgency, certainly. There's a lot of variation from customer to customer on what they want to do and how they want to build it. I think there's a general consensus, though, that an interest in cloud-based solutions, because I think they're starting to see that those types of complicated things can actually be done in the cloud, and there's a real interest to be able to have, you know, quick build infrastructure and software on demand. But no matter, like, it doesn't matter like what customers we're talking to, they're all pretty complicated conversations. And so we're taking our time, but there's definitely a big move towards trying to get more done with less resources. And I don't know, Simon, are you guys seeing some of the same things?
Yeah, I would mirror that. I think from the people that I talk to, we're definitely in the midst of a transition. And most customers are trying to work out what their business model looks like in the future. And I think what that creates is an environment, obviously looking for efficiency, but also needing to be agile, because they don't necessarily know what they're going to be doing next week or the next month. And so they're looking for solutions to make them efficient, but also be able to react quickly to market changes.
Yeah, I think you've got a scenario where people are certainly being asked to do more, to deliver more content, to process more content, to create more content. And Lance, you kind of alluded to this. Sort of, you have to do it with less. So it's the do more with less kind of problem. And I think we see that quite a bit, and that's, you know, one reason people are looking to upgrade their entire infrastructure, because they need ways to do more with less. Dom, are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to expand a little on what Simon said about being reactive, it's not just about being reactive. I think it's about being proactive and trying new things to see what works, experimenting with new product offerings, new methods of delivery, all of that kind of stuff. Because I think at this point, no one quite knows what's going to work and what's going to be successful and what isn't. So we're really in a period where the industry's trying new things and seeing what works.
Yeah. So let's pivot a little bit and talk a bit about that cloud transition. Lance, you brought it up. In terms of your observations around media companies embracing the cloud, do you think they're ready for the cloud, or are they still sort of thinking about whether the cloud is something that might be right for them?
Well, I think that before the pandemic, we were working with a small handful of companies that were being super proactive and a lot of companies that were just asking good questions. On the other side of the pandemic, it was still the same, but pretty quickly started flipping where a lot of folks were starting to ask questions about how they can experiment in the cloud and what the benefits are. One of the challenges we have as technologists is that the cloud it's a big pool of compute resource and storage resource, sure, but there are very complicated operations that have to happen in there, and so it's challenging as the technologist to try to make it all stable and work in there. So I think all of us are sort of on a journey together, really is the way that I think about it, the customers and the technologists alike.
Yeah, Dom, Cinnafilm was a company that has both have on-prem and products now in the cloud. How is that transition for you from sort of a supplier's perspective?
Well, interesting. We did things somewhat backwards. We started with the cloud product and created an on-prem product because it was clear that there were a significant number of customers who, for various reasons, were not ready to move at least some of their work into the cloud. And we realized quickly that, we had to allow people to work in the way that they needed to work today. And I think that we have a lot of people who acknowledge that one day they will be largely or entirely in the cloud, but that is a long road to get there. And there are many reasons why they're not ready to do that yet.
Yeah. And I'll add to that too. One of the trickier things, we did start out in the cloud first, as Dom mentioned, and we all do the very best we can to come up with a cost structure that makes sense, that our business can thrive on, but isn't obtuse or overbearing on the customer. And you just learn by doing. And it has been very, very tricky business to compile all of these technologies and consolidate them into one. And you guys are going to experience this, or have experienced this too, where you can consolidate all these technologies into one stack, but you have all of these, costs that add up. And so one of the trickier things for us migrating to the cloud was, well, we had to start somewhere, but then we've had to chip our teeth a little bit year after year and make some adjustments because it's not trivial. And all of these companies that we've pulled into our software stack, they all need to make money too. So we have to figure out together how this cost structure works. But so that's been one of the trickier parts for us to migrate to the cloud and then stay there and then have an on-prem story that sort of matches and balances with what we're doing in the cloud. Simon, you guys have probably experienced a lot of that too, right?
Yeah, I think most people that I talk with, it's not a matter of when are they going to move to the cloud. It's like how are they going to get started? I think most customers have acknowledged that it's probably their final destination, and how long it takes them to get there is really the variable. Quite often it's challenging to know where to start because, Dom, as you said, there are some workflows that are currently being done on-prem, and just doing that workflow in the cloud would be prohibitively expensive or disruptive. I think once you've got your core infrastructure in the cloud, adding those kind of functions incrementally makes a lot more financial sense. But sometimes it's how do you get those core functions up there in the first place?
Yeah, I think, Lance, you talked about experiment. And one of the things you get with the cloud, especially if you've got sort of a platform that's helping you manage the work that you're doing in the cloud, is this ability to spin up new resources, try new tools. We've even experienced the ability to spin up Pixelstrings on the Rally platform very quickly for customers. And that allowing customers to try things out without having to go all in up front on a major investment in order to experiment and iterate from there.
Yeah, well, exactly. And when we built our cloud solution first, we originally envisioned, or I did, I should say, when I really pushed for this, that there would just be a lot of work that just went right to the cloud. And what it's turned out to be, certainly there's some of that, but what it's turned out more to be is a platform to experiment and try things with a reasonable budget. If you can help someone do a very complicated workflow and it costs them about what it would cost to buy some lunch just to run a few minutes to see how this thing works, that provides us a real nice on-ramp for whatever they want to do, be it hybrid or on-prem. So it's been super beneficial for us to have built this SaaS access point, because the experimentation is critical. I mean, when you're talking about retooling major infrastructure, especially in software, that's an expensive proposition, and they need to be able to have an affordable way to experiment, and that's been a big part of what we've tried to do.
The one thing that I would say that makes a bit of a difference there, Lance, is where is the customer's content? So
Yeah.
they may have a copy of the archive already in the cloud, and at that point, experimenting in the cloud becomes extremely simple.
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of the difference in terms of many customers haven't necessarily migrated their entire supply chain and their entire technical infrastructure yet, but they do have cloud content storage.
And Dom, you can comment on this too, but we've seen customers that range from folks that haven't put anything in AWS yet to folks that have a lot of stuff in AWS, and you have to be ready for both of those cases, because it just varies on where they want to be, right? Go ahead, Dom.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree. Perhaps not only is where the content needs to be at the beginning of a workflow or a supply chain, it's also kind of where it needs to end up. If it starts in the cloud and ends in the cloud, it's a no-brainer to try and do the work in the cloud. If it starts on the ground and ends in the cloud, or vice versa, then that may become a little bit more complicated, and it may be that you're doing some work on the ground and some work in the cloud at that point.
One other observation I've had is quite often it's not about the technology of transitioning to the cloud. It's about changing how they forecast, how they budget, how they allocate costs to the work that they're doing. And sometimes that financial, cultural transition is harder than the technology transition.
Yeah, well, and sometimes they're pinned to something they've already committed to in terms of cloud spend, and they've got to make it work in that cloud because they've already committed to some large chunk of cost associated with a particular cloud. And we've run into that a couple of times where they've asked us, well, we're not in that cloud, we're in this cloud. And it's like, well, that makes some things complicated as well. So sometimes it's my point, I guess, is that it's every conversation is unique. We never know what the customer is going to bring to the table, but we've seen a wide enough variety that I think we're able to help them at least begin the discussion and start planning for their retooling strategy.
And certainly, one thing I think we're definitely seeing at the moment is customers who have a large amount of on-prem infrastructure. It's bought and paid for, and they're going to keep on sweating it until it breaks, frankly.
Yeah.
And then they'll move to the cloud. But while they've got hardware on-prem that still works, they're going to try and use it as much as they can.
Yeah, I think we'll go back to one of the comments that Simon made. I do find it interesting that a lot of the conversations that we have with media companies is not necessarily about why should I move to the cloud, but how to move to the cloud. And it may be piecemeal, like you say, Dom, where you start moving a piece of what you're doing to the cloud, and it's also different by region. You see Europe now becoming far more active at cloud-based migrations than, say, the US was a while ago. So I think we're seeing that sort of evolution in the market as people are moving to embrace the cloud in these workflows, especially in terms of getting content into the cloud, as we were just talking about. Let's pivot a little bit again to sort of this topic around monetizing content. And we use the word content readiness. So Lance, I'm kind of curious, what do you mean by content readiness, and why is that maybe an important concept for us to be talking about?
Well, sure. I mean, content readiness to me means that the media that you want to sell into a particular channel is ready to go, or you have a quick button to be able to retrieve that media for ready to deliver. The challenge comes in the multiple variants, of the different standards and formats that are required in all these different channels. And so that's been our speciality, is to help convert a media file from one format to another, both for picture and sound, and retain quality. We've seen some really great since the pandemic. Let me step back. Since the pandemic, there's been a big movement towards going into the archive to retrieve content, primarily with the strikes that happened after the pandemic. You've got a lot of gems in the safe. You need to pull them out and dust them off, and a lot of those gems were created in yesterday's format and need to be delivered in today's format. So content readiness is basically knowing that you have the ability to very quickly retrieve a valuable asset, dust it off, make it look good for channel delivery. And we've seen some very creative use by some of our customers. I'll give Fremantle's a really good example of one who have gone into their content archive and not only brought it out and made it look better, but gamified it, which is very clever. And so I think a lot of media owners are looking at the benefits of bringing out all those great, well-created, beautifully shot, pieces of media and preparing it for today's delivery requirements. It's a long answer, but I think that's we've seen quite a bit of that.
Yeah, I kind of associate content readiness with having the ability to be responsive to demands, especially when you've got that opportunity, like you talk about, where I've got a piece of content in my archive, someone's come up with a way to monetize that. How do I quickly help them take advantage of that opportunity? And so content readiness is about having kind of the infrastructure and the tools ready to process that content to deliver on the opportunity that might have just come up. Simon,
yeah, and sometimes
go ahead, Lance.
I was going to say, sometimes that opportunity is you have 2 weeks to get this to us, and
right,
that's you have to be ready to very quickly turn that around. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Simon, I was going to ask if you had talked about the word agility earlier. I think that kind of goes along with that notion of content readiness. How have you seen media operations departments sort of evolve to handle these new demands that are coming down the pike?
I think it's part of a broader shift. I think if you go back 5 years or so, the primary way that people were monetizing content was on their own distribution platforms, either on their own channels or their own direct-to-consumer apps. And I think where content readiness really has a play is people are now much more broadly monetizing content. They're selling it to other streaming services, they're localizing it and selling it internationally, they're syndicating it on other people's platforms. And so just the number of destinations that content goes to, and therefore the number of formats and the number of different versions, is much, much bigger than it was even 5 years ago.
So we were just talking about the cloud. How does the cloud help achieve or accelerate this notion of content readiness? Maybe Dom, I'll toss that one to you.
I think one of the things that occurs to me, or a couple of things that occur to me, firstly, you have a much potentially broader set of tools that you can bring to bear on those processes. And it's not quite content readiness, it's being ready to have content that's ready.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So being in the cloud, you have a vast number of tools available to you, some of which are really only available in the cloud. I mean, it wouldn't be a webinar in 2024 without someone saying AI. And there are AI tools that can add a huge amount of utility in areas like localization and so on, or metadata harvesting and so on. And many of those tools are only available in the context of a cloud workflow. And then just the speed, the agility, the fact that you can spin things up and pay as you go allows you to really, quickly, flexibly, and cost effectively take the content you have and turn it into the content you need in a way you just can't do on the ground.
I think you've just pinpointed exactly the challenge with the sweating the on-prem assets.
Yes.
You don't have agility, because if a business opportunity comes along, you're limited by what your system is currently capable of doing, right? The tools that you've got, the scale that it's got, the speed that it can actually process content at, and all of those things tend to go away if you're in a cloud environment, because you've got access to all of the tools. And so if it's a good business decision, you can do it. You're not limited by what you've got.
Mm-hmm.
Simon, have you seen any kind of examples from customers that have been able to kind of meet that sort of unplanned or met a better deadline because of having that cloud-based infrastructure?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there are customers who have their sort of business as usual volumes that they're processing for all of the regular things. And then sort of ad hoc content sales opportunities would come along, and they simply couldn't service them because their business as usual stuff was saturating their platform. One particular customer I'm thinking of actually started their journey by saying, okay, well, let's deal with those ad hoc things in the cloud first and see what kind of benefit it gives us. And then over time, they realized that actually their business as usual stuff could run exactly the same path, and it was much, much more beneficial.
Yeah, I also think of a story we recently heard from Hearst Networks EMEA, and their desire to have this hit show Gypsy Rose, which came out in the United States, and they wanted to have it in Europe as close to the US release date as they could. In the past, they used to have to wait for that to be standards converted and to come over from the United States. Now that they're in the cloud, they're doing a cloud-to-cloud transfer of the content and doing processing, I think with Pixelstrings, by the way, to standards convert that. And that window has gone from, I think, 8 weeks down to 8 days or 6 days. So a dramatic reduction in their ability to monetize that content, because now they're piggybacking on all the social media promotions that are happening out of the US. And I think they even saw a ratings increase on that. So good illustration how speed and agility and taking advantage of cloud-based infrastructure actually led to a bottom line improvement. Lance, do you have any other kind of customer examples like that?
Yeah, I've got a couple. I mean, there was a post house in Burbank that is a customer, and they were running television episodics. They had to convert it for overnight delivery overseas. They already had a process in-house. So this is more of an experimentation example, but so basically the idea is they run off the set with this tape at 5 p.m. and by 4 a.m. it needs to be in the inbox over in the UK, and they already had a process for that. And so they tested our SaaS to run this show. So first they had to bring the content in, then they had to upload it to the cloud and then process it with our tool, and then download it, or at least leave it in the file for delivery. And the first couple runs, we missed the beat by just maybe 20 minutes, but then they worked with us. So we went and said, well, I guess we could probably stand this up on slightly faster GPUs. It'll cost a little bit more because, and that's one thing that everyone's very sensitive on is total sum cost. But we actually got it turned around by 3:30 a.m. and that was an experimentation gone well. So now, because they went through the trouble of creating this experiment and running this drill, they know in their minds that if their on-prem stuff gets overloaded and something comes in, they know how to drag and drop the workflow, and they have a process and a procedure now for doing quick turnaround. So that's a real world example as well.
All right, let's move a little bit to, okay, we talked about the cloud, we talked about this notion of content readiness and being able to spin up resources quickly. What are some other steps? Like if you were going to advise our audience here on things they can do to improve their content readiness and thereby their monetization, what are some things that you would you might advise to do that to help accelerate that content readiness? Dom, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
I think certainly from our point of view, and the little piece of the puzzle that we fit in, encouraging customers to pre-normalize their content libraries. So everything's in the same form. They know what the audio layouts are and what the resolutions are and all of that stuff. So everything's, in one standard archival form and ready to go. And then it's very, very easy to make that into what you need, rather than suddenly realizing that there's some egregious pull down pattern in there, and now you've got to work out how to go fix that before you can do whatever else you need to do with it. So I think trying to solve a proportion of the problems up front and creating a really viable intermediate is incredibly useful.
Feels like that kind of enables this idea of just-in-time processing for all those
Exactly.
deliveries, right?
Yeah.
Now you can just spin up the resources to turn it into
the
delivery package you need without having to go through that initial sort of normalization process.
It essentially risk minimization by front loading the risk so that it's all taken out ahead of time.
Simon or Lance, any other thoughts on those kind of steps companies can take?
I'll jump in real quick. I definitely think that setting a small budget aside to experiment is critical, because running these operations in the cloud and trying all of these new technologies, some of them are newer, some of them aren't, but you want to try to build all of these access points and run these things in the cloud. And a lot of the companies that run these technologies in the cloud, they're not really super big companies, and so, when you step into the cloud and you start to experiment, I think having a budget and working with these technology companies to say, hey, maybe there's a test mode I can run in or something like that, like have a little money to spend, put something in the budget, doesn't have to be a lot, just so that you can understand and experiment with things. I think that's a huge game saver, because it does cost money to run these experiments in the cloud. The AWS hasn't come out with a free tier yet that I'm aware of. So it can be done intelligibly too. Like if you can create a batch of 1 minute files, for example, in just maybe 20 or 30 1-minute files, that's all you need just to get a feel for how this is done. You don't have to run a full long form or 3 or 4 long forms through and then realize, this isn't quite what I wanted. So I think creating a test library is also super important. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, I think it can be quite a daunting challenge, like the idea that you've got to move everything. And I think sometimes picking one thing and starting there and treat it as a learning experience. There is a mind shift change between traditional, technology acquisition and the cloud, and that is you're used to buying something, and then that's the thing that you're going to have for the next 5 years or 7 years or however long it is. And I think one of the things that people need to realize when they move to the cloud is that they're not locking themselves into doing things a certain way. And so you can start somewhere, you can do something, and you can iterate on it over time, you can improve it, and you can modify it, and then you can build on it. So just knowing that it's a journey rather than a destination, I think.
And we're all going to, as technologists, we're all going to get the customers there as fast and as efficiently as we possibly can. Like, we're not out to burn time, but you have to have a bit of an open mind. And you have to be ready for, to break some eggs to make an omelet, to use a really old saying. So Geoff, I think we're coming up on 30 minutes. Unless you have any final topics, I can segue us into the Q&A section.
Sure. Yep. The only thing I was going to ask that to kind of end it up was if you had any suggestions for the audience on sort of best practices in terms of this cloud migration, but you've sort of already kind of started there. Simon talking about, start small, do something. Lance, you talk a lot about experimentation and being willing to do that and setting up a small test bed. I think those are all great sort of suggestions for helping people get to the cloud, to try it out, to learn, build some skills, build some knowledge. I know there is a question that's come in around cost models. Maybe before you go to the Q&A, maybe you guys could each talk about the cost models for your platforms. Simon?
Yes. So Rally is a consumption-based platform. And so you pay for how much you use, and there's kind of two components to that. One is how many assets you're managing and processing. And then the other one is how many third-party media processing tools you use and how much of them. So it's literally a price per content minute for the library of tools, and depending on your workflows, that's how you can predict what you're going to spend.
Yeah. Lance?
Go ahead, Dom.
As far as Pixelstrings and Cinnafilm goes, we have a fairly flexible cost model. So, it's available entirely consumption-based through Rally. It's also available as a consumption-based plus subscription model, external to Rally in the cloud. And then, as we alluded to earlier, we have, on-prem subscription models available as well. So we try and match our cost model to the customer's business case.
Cool. All right, Lance, take it away.
All right, got some good questions in here. So I'm gonna say we may have set a record by getting 19 minutes into the webinar without saying the word AI. So congratulations to everyone. Well done. Now just teasing. First question. My question goes to both platforms or solutions in terms of interacting, managing assets with metadata at any level, and then utilization of AI, ML, or multimodal AI in regard to those platforms, more legacy AI instead of Gen AI. Simon, do you have some thoughts on that one?
Yes, we have quite a few customers who run their content through AI analysis, fundamentally for metadata enrichment. So those tools looking for scene changes, shot changes, where are the blacks, but also things like who are the actors, what are the products potentially that are in that content, and including things like content compliance things. So where is their violence, where is their nudity, where is their bad language? And so those customers are doing that primarily for two kind of different use cases. The first one is to aid that content compliance process. So we talked before about content readiness for sort of international distribution. Part of that is format, but part of that is also what you can and can't include. And so if you've got a guide for these are the areas of this piece of content that you need to focus on for compliance to a particular region, you can obviously massively increase the efficiency of that operator because they can process more content. So that's one use case. The other use case is really either about where you can insert ads. So recommendations for here would be a good place for an ad break because different content on different platforms has different regulations in terms of how many ads you can have. Or the other one is actually feeding that information into advertising systems. So based on, hey, here was a scene with a car, inform your sales team, maybe you might want to talk to car companies and sell ads in this next break.
Do you find, Simon, just to add on to that, do you find that most of these new applicable utility AI type apps, are they available in the cloud and on-prem, or are they always in the cloud and sometimes on-prem? Like for customers that are building hybrid workflows, becoming dependent on, let's say, one of those AI apps, if it's only in the cloud, does that mean that they have to build in the cloud? Or what is your experience as a tech stack, organizer, so to speak, of what you're seeing in terms of some of those utility AI apps and where they're available?
The customers that we work with are pretty much exclusively in the cloud. So the tools that they're using are cloud-based tools. But there's a plethora of those tools, both from the cloud vendors and from third parties. And I think one of the things that I've seen is the ability to mix and match those tools based on what it is that you're trying to do, because some are better at one type of detection than another. And so mixing and matching those really allows you to get the best of both.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you. I'm going to throw this question to you, Dom. Is there a good model for hybrid architecture across these types of workflows?
And I would say, honestly, not good enough, probably. I would say that in general, there's a lot of systems that are cloud-based, and there's a lot of systems that are on-prem or running on customer infrastructure. And there are very few people as of yet, I think, who've really cracked that hybridized kind of model technically. It'll come. but I think we have a long way to go.
Yeah, and we have seen and helped build some of those hybrid workflows.
We have.
You know, you run the math and you constantly run the math and you constantly run the math and you just get to some point that seems reasonable, and then you have to dive in. And then you may learn that you've got too much on-prem and not enough cloud, or too much cloud and not enough on-prem, and you're going to have to change some gears later. So speaking of sort of budgeting these types of tests, Geoff, I'll ask you. Question is, what is a regional budget to run these types of tests, and for how long? Are we talking a week, a month, longer?
I would think you would want to run your tests for longer than a week, and maybe even longer than a month. The good news is you're paying kind of on a consumption basis, so it's not like you need to budget tens of thousands of dollars. You can, to use your example before, if you did those 10 1-minute clips that you were talking about, you could run those for a month or two through a variety of different tools so that you have time to test things out, see the results. Because the other reason for taking a little bit of time is the learning you're going to get out of it, and being able to try different things, learn something, and then try it again and try it again. And you're still are only maybe a very low thousands of dollars that you would have invested, if that, based on how much work you're doing.
Right. So here's a follow-on question related. So do you guys have an easy way to try out, for example, Pixelstrings and SDVI? In other words, a proof of concept budget like plan. Do you guys have an easy ramp for people that want to test these things? I'll start with you, Simon, then go to Dom. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, I guess there's two parts to that. One is whether you're an SDVI Rally customer or not. So if you're not, we have a POC program. And so you can try our platform and, as Geoff just said, experiment and build some initial workflows and measure what you think the impact of those would be. Once you are a customer, using Pixelstrings, for example, is as easy as including Pixelstrings in a supply chain that you've just built. And so plugging it in and plugging it out, there's not a commitment. You can experiment, you can use as much or as little as you want. And that's really valuable to our customers because it, you know, to previous points, it allows them to respond really quickly.
Yeah. Dom, you want to add to that from our side?
Yeah, as far as Pixelstrings goes, we certainly have some limited term free trial options to do some basic tire kicking and testing, and then some very cost effective pricing tiers for longer term testing, but still not full high volume production.
Okay, so last question, and then we'll wrap it up. And this is still related because it must be important. Is there a way to forecast the total projected costs? And that's a bit of a loaded question, obviously, because there's so many ways to do this. But when, for example, when a customer comes to you guys, Simon, and says, okay, I want to get started. I understand you have a POC program. What homework do I need to go off and do in order to be ready to start the POC program? Like, what are my total projected costs? Because to get even maybe a $5,000 or a $10,000 experimental budget, I'm just using that as an example, I'm going to need to tell other people that what this ultimately leads to is something that, yeah, maybe during experimentation it's costing a couple dollars a minute or $4 a minute, but later on it's going to be comparable. And so for someone that's starting to build a budget to do these types of things, what are all of the things they need to keep in mind? I think I'm kind of rephrasing the question with my own language, so hopefully that they don't mind that I did that. Go ahead, Simon.
I think budgeting is actually not the biggest part of that challenge. I mean, if something is consumption based and you can forecast, here's how many shows I'm going to make, or here's how many pieces of content I'm going to put through the platform, and here are the processes that I'm going to run on them, you can tell exactly what that's going to cost. I think the bigger challenge for most customers is being able to articulate the value and the savings without having done that experimentation. Because they don't know how many of those steps that, maybe there's somebody currently copying files from one location to another, and that's really not a high value task. So as you automate some of those things as part of that transition, building the business model for where the savings are going to be, and particularly agility, trying to forecast what agility is worth to your business is extremely difficult.
Yeah. And then it gets even more complicated when you start talking about the total net savings, when you're talking about power consumption and amount of work days that are saved because people maybe can work from home when maybe they couldn't have otherwise. It's a pretty complicated web, but I appreciate that answer, because it is all, at the end of the day, it's always about the value that this drives for the business. That's why we do these things. That's why we believe in them. Dom, do you want to add something? Then Geoff, I'll come to you for some final comments. Go ahead, Dom.
I think Simon summarized it very well, to be honest. Yeah, it's very easy to predict the cost of a given operation or set of operations on a given, piece of media or whatever. You obviously need to have an understanding of your content volume. That's critical. But beyond that, the hard piece is actually understanding what the net value to the business is of moving to those workflows and processes.
Geoff, final comments on that?
And I do reiterate that it's all about the value. It is hard to calculate, but it's worth calculating. It's worth spending some time mapping out how are you doing things kind of currently, and how do you anticipate doing them as you move to a different infrastructure, a different set of tools. You can predict the cost, but don't forget the value of things like how fast you can respond to an opportunity, how much revenue you're going to be able to achieve earlier, because you've changed the way you've done things and you're eliminating some steps you didn't really need. So yeah, value is where it's at, and being able to measure the efficiency and the agility of your operations is really key.
Yeah, great words. Thank you, Geoff, and thank you, Simon and Dom, for your input today. And speaking of spending good quality time on things, I appreciate everyone's time this morning. I hope that you found some benefits from some of the experiences that we've shared here today. I thank you all and hope you all have a great rest of your week. Please feel free to follow up with us after the webinar if you have any questions. It's what we love to do, is help solve problems for everyone. So looking forward to seeing everyone again soon, I hope, and safe travels, and be well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good morning.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Goodbye.